Rain streaked the glass panes of the luxurious downtown restaurant, blurring the vibrant city lights into a kaleidoscope of soft colors. Inside, the air was warm, scented with the delicate aroma of truffle oil and fine wine. The chatter of well-dressed patrons hummed in the background, a melody of laughter and clinking glasses. At an intimate corner table, Matteo Caldwell sat, his commanding presence impossible to ignore even in the sea of elegance. Matteo, CEO of one of the largest tech conglomerates in the country, adjusted the cuffs of his tailored charcoal suit, his every movement exuding quiet authority. Across from him sat Cassandra, his latest romantic companion, who epitomized sophistication in a sleek black dress. Her manicured fingers toyed with the edge of her champagne flute as she smiled at him. "Matteo, I don't think you've even heard a word I've said," Cassandra teased, her voice low and melodic, though tinged with mild annoyance. Matteo glanced up, his piercing blue eyes meeting hers. "I'm sorry, Cassandra, just preoccupied tonight." Though he offered a faint smile, his thoughts betrayed him, swirling with an unease he couldn't quite place. He had carefully curated his life since the divorce, perfect dinners, beautiful dates, and a business empire that thrived despite the chaos in his personal life. Yet, something was amiss, gnawing at the edges of his meticulously controlled world. The waiter approached, discreet and efficient, to refill their glasses. Matteo's gaze flicked to the entrance, drawn by movement. At first it was reflexive, born of habit rather than interest. But when his eyes locked onto the woman who had just walked in, his breath caught. Eleanor. She was thinner than he remembered, her frame accentuated by the simple beige dress she wore. Her hair, once perfectly coiffed, was now pulled into a hasty bun, a few strands escaping to frame her face. But what truly stopped him cold was the curve of her belly, round, unmistakable, and utterly unignorable. 6 months pregnant. Matteo's grip on his wineglass tightened imperceptibly. She wasn't alone. Eleanor carried a tray, balancing drinks with practiced ease as she made her way across the room. The uniform she wore was modest, the kind of thing required by high-end restaurants for their staff. She was working. His ex-wife, 6 months pregnant, working in a place where Matteo had come to impress a date. The sight ignited something visceral in him, a roiling mix of anger, guilt, and confusion that he struggled to contain. "Matteo," Cassandra's voice jolted him back. "Is everything all right?" He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Fine, just thought I saw someone I knew." But his eyes betrayed him, fixed on Eleanor as she moved gracefully through the restaurant, unaware of his presence. He felt an overwhelming urge to stand, to demand answers, to know why she was here, why she hadn't told him. As Eleanor paused by a nearby table, exchanging pleasantries with a patron, Matteo's world began to tilt. He hadn't planned for this. He hadn't prepared to confront the ghost of his past in the middle of his carefully constructed present. And yet, here she was, living a reality he knew nothing about, carrying a secret he couldn't ignore. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. As their paths edged closer, the collision inevitable. Matteo couldn't tear his eyes away from Eleanor as she weaved through the restaurant, her movements graceful despite the subtle weariness in her posture. He had always admired her resilience, but seeing her like this, working late, visibly pregnant and exuding the quiet dignity he remembered, stirred something raw and unsettled within him. He had spent the last 5 months convincing himself he was over her, that their divorce had been the clean break he needed, but now all those carefully constructed walls threatened to collapse. "Matteo," Cassandra's voice cut through his thoughts again, sharper this time. "Seriously, who are you staring at?" He blinked, his jaw tightening as he met Cassandra's gaze. "No one," he lied, his tone clipped. "Just someone I used to know." Her perfectly arched brow lifted, skepticism plain on her face. "Used to? You look like you've seen a ghost." Matteo didn't answer. His focus had shifted back to Eleanor, who now stood near the bar, speaking with another server. The faint smile on her lips didn't reach her eyes. He could tell she was tired, exhausted even, and the sight gnawed at him. What had happened since the divorce? Why hadn't she reached out? And whose child was she carrying? The thought of another man made his chest tighten, his pulse quickening in a way that felt uncomfortably close to jealousy. Matteo clenched his fists under the table, struggling to maintain his composure. "Excuse me for a moment," he said abruptly, rising from his seat. "Matteo," Cassandra started, but he was already walking away, his long strides purposeful as he approached the bar. He ignored the stares of other patrons, the whispers that followed his departure. His focus was singular, zeroed in on Eleanor. She didn't notice him at first, busy arranging glasses on a tray. It wasn't until he cleared his throat that she looked up, her expression freezing mid-smile as her eyes locked on his. For a moment neither of them spoke, the weight of unspoken words hanging thick in the air. "Eleanor," Matteo said finally, his voice low but steady. "Can we talk?" Her lips parted in surprise, but she quickly masked it, her professional demeanor sliding into place. "I'm working, Matteo. I can see that," he said, his jaw tightening. "But this isn't a coincidence. We need to talk." She hesitated, glancing around the restaurant as if searching for an escape. "I don't think now is the time." "When then?" His tone softened, but there was an edge of frustration beneath it. "You're 6 months pregnant, Eleanor. I think I deserve an explanation." Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of defiance breaking through her calm exterior. "You don't deserve anything, Matteo. Not after the way you walked away." The words hit him like a slap, but he refused to back down. "You think I walked away? You're the one who wanted the divorce." Eleanor's expression faltered, a flash of pain crossing her face before she quickly schooled it. "Because I couldn't keep competing with your empire. I needed more than crumbs of your attention, Matteo." Her voice was quiet but firm, laced with an undercurrent of hurt that made his chest tighten. He opened his mouth to respond, but she held up a hand, silencing him. "Look, this isn't the place for this conversation," she said, her tone softening. "I have tables to serve. Please just let me do my job." Before he could argue, she turned and walked away, her back straight despite the weight of their exchange. Matteo stood there for a moment, his fists clenched at his sides, before returning to his table. Cassandra watched him with narrowed eyes, her annoyance barely concealed. "Care to explain what that was about?" she asked, her tone icy. "No," Matteo said flatly, picking up his glass of wine and downing it in one gulp. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Matteo barely heard a word Cassandra said, his thoughts consumed by Eleanor and the child she carried. By the time they left the restaurant, Cassandra was fuming, but he hardly noticed. His mind was already made up. He needed answers. The next day, Matteo stood outside Eleanor's apartment building, a modest brick complex in a neighborhood far removed from the luxury she had once known with him. He hadn't expected to find her address so easily, but money and influence had their perks. When Eleanor opened the door, her expression shifted from surprise to irritation in an instant. "Matteo, what are you doing here?" "I'm not leaving until you talk to me," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Please, Eleanor, I need to understand." She sighed, stepping aside to let him in. The apartment was small but tidy, filled with simple, practical furniture. It was a stark contrast to the sprawling penthouse they had once shared, and the difference hit him harder than he expected. "Fine," she said, crossing her arms as she leaned against the kitchen counter. "Ask your questions. Is it mine?" The words were out before he could stop them, blunt and heavy. Eleanor's eyes widened, and for a moment he thought she might deny it. But then she exhaled, her shoulders sagging. "Yes, Matteo, the baby is yours." The admission left him reeling. His mind raced, trying to piece together the implications, the timeline, the reasons she hadn't told him sooner. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "You had to know I would have been there for you." She shook her head, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Because I didn't want to be another obligation, Matteo. I wanted to raise this child in peace, without feeling like a burden in your life." "You were never a burden," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And neither is this baby." Eleanor looked away, her composure cracking. "It didn't feel that way when I was begging for your attention, Matteo. I couldn't do it anymore." His chest ached at her words, the truth of them cutting deep. He had failed her, failed them, and now they were both paying the price. But as he looked at her, standing there with all the strength and vulnerability he had always admired, he made a silent vow. He wouldn't fail her again. "I want to be involved, Eleanor," he said, his tone resolute. "Whatever it takes, I'll make it right." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "We'll see," she said finally, her voice soft but laced with caution. It wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. The revelation that Eleanor's baby was his sent Matteo's carefully managed world into a tailspin. He had built an empire on decisiveness and control, but now, for the first time in years, he felt utterly unmoored. The days that followed were a blur of restless nights and futile attempts to focus on work. His mind was a battlefield of guilt, regret, and a gnawing determination to fix what he had broken. It was nearly a week later when he found himself standing outside Eleanor's apartment again, a box of groceries in one hand and a small bouquet of sunflowers in the other. He knew she wouldn't make this easy. Eleanor never did, but he was determined to prove he meant what he said. When she opened the door, her expression shifted from surprise to guarded suspicion. "Matteo," she said, crossing her arms. "What are you doing here?" "I brought these for you," he said, holding out the box and the flowers. "Groceries, in case you needed them. And the sunflowers, well, I remembered they're your favorite." Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. Finally, she stepped aside and motioned for him to come in. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly, as she took the groceries from him, setting them on the counter. "I know," he said, his voice earnest, "but I wanted to. I'm trying, Eleanor. Please let me try." She hesitated, her gaze softening just enough to let him breathe a little easier. "Fine, but don't think one gesture erases everything." "I don't," he said quickly. "I just want to help." She nodded, and for a moment, silence stretched between them. Matteo studied the apartment again, noting the small but distinct touches of Eleanor's personality, the framed photos on the wall, the cozy throw blankets on the couch, and the stack of well-worn books on the coffee table. It was modest, but warm, a reflection of the woman who had built a life for herself despite everything. As they sat down at the kitchen table, the air between them was heavy with unspoken tension. Matteo cleared his throat, determined to bridge the gap. "How are you feeling?" he asked, glancing at her belly. Eleanor arched a brow, a faint smile tugging at her lips, despite her guarded demeanor. "You mean besides carrying a whole human being around?" "I'm fine. Tired, but fine." "I can imagine," he said, his voice softening. "I want to make this easier for you, Eleanor. Whatever you need, doctor's appointments, bills, anything, just tell me." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" "More than you know," he said, leaning forward. "I meant what I said. I want to be involved. I want to support you and the baby." Eleanor looked down at her hands, her defenses cracking just enough to reveal the vulnerability beneath. "It's just hard to trust that, Matteo, after everything." "I know," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I know I let you down before, but I swear to you, Eleanor, I won't let you down again." Over the next few weeks, Matteo threw himself into proving his commitment. He accompanied Eleanor to her doctor's appointments, helped her set up a proper nursery, and even took on the unenviable task of assembling furniture. A task that had Eleanor laughing for the first time in months when he fumbled with a crib. "You're hopeless with a screwdriver," she teased, her laughter filling the small apartment like sunlight breaking through a storm. "I'm a CEO, not a carpenter," he shot back, grinning despite himself. Their moments of levity were brief but precious, reminders of the connection they once shared. But just as things seemed to be improving, the complexities of their past and the uncertainties of their future came crashing back. One afternoon, as Matteo sat in his office reviewing a report, his assistant buzzed in with an unexpected visitor. "Mr. Caldwell, there's a woman here to see you," she said, her tone hesitant. "She says it's important." Matteo frowned. "Who is it?" She wouldn't give her name, but she said it's about Eleanor. His heart sank. Waving his assistant in, he braced himself as the door opened to reveal a woman he didn't recognize, mid-30s, sharp-eyed, and exuding an air of self-assuredness. "I'm Laura," she said without preamble, stepping into the office. "I'm a friend of Eleanor's." Matteo stood, his confusion evident. "What's this about?" "Eleanor doesn't know I'm here," Laura said, crossing her arms. "But I needed to speak with you. She won't tell you this, but she's struggling. Financially, emotionally. You name it." His jaw tightened. "I'm already helping her. Whatever she needs." "Are you?" Laura interrupted, her tone biting. "Because the Eleanor I know is too proud to ask for anything. She's been through hell, Matteo. Losing you. Losing the life she thought she'd have. She's been fighting to stay afloat, and now she's raising your child alone." Her words hit him like a blow, guilt and anger surging in equal measure. "I'm trying to fix that," he said, his voice low but firm. "I want to be there for her. For both of them." "Then prove it," Laura shot back. "Not just with money or gestures. Be there when it matters. Before he could respond, she turned on her heel and walked out, leaving him standing in the middle of his office, her words echoing in his mind. That evening, Matteo returned to Eleanor's apartment. His resolve hardened. He found her sitting on the couch, her hands resting on her belly as she read a book. She looked up as he entered, her brow furrowing. "Matteo? What are you doing here?" He sat down across from her, his expression serious. "We need to talk." Her defenses went up immediately, her posture stiffening. "About what?" "About us," he said, his voice steady. "And what happens next?" Eleanor sighed, setting the book aside. "Matteo, we've been over this." "No," he interrupted gently. "I need you to understand something. I know I failed you before. I know I made you feel like you didn't matter. But you do, Eleanor. You always have." Her eyes widened, the raw emotion in his voice catching her off guard. "I want to be a father to this baby," he continued. "But more than that, I want to be here for you. I want us to figure this out. Together." Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "It's not that simple, Matteo." "I know it's not," he said, reaching for her hand. "But nothing worth fighting forever is." She looked at him for a long moment, her walls finally beginning to crumble. And in that moment, Matteo knew he was ready to fight for the life they could have, whatever it took. Matteo's words hung in the air, raw and unvarnished, as Eleanor wrestled with emotions she'd worked so hard to suppress. For months, she had conditioned herself to believe that she didn't need Matteo, that she could raise the baby alone and carve out a life of her own. But his sincerity, the unflinching way he looked at her now, cracked the walls she'd so carefully built. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You hurt me, Matteo. You left me alone when I needed you most." The weight of her words hit him like a sledgehammer, and he nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I did," he admitted, "and I've spent every day since regretting it. But I'm here now, Eleanor, and I'm not going anywhere." Her gaze softened, and for a fleeting moment Matteo thought he saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. But before she could respond, a sharp knock on the door shattered the fragile intimacy of the moment. Eleanor frowned, rising cautiously. Who could that be? Matteo stood as well, his protective instincts kicking in. "Let me answer it." When he opened the door, he was met by an unfamiliar man, tall and wiry, with a thin-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. His demeanor was casual, but there was something calculating in his gaze. "Matteo Caldwell," the man said, his tone smooth. "Mind if I come in?" Eleanor stepped forward, her face paling as recognition dawned. "Victor," she said, her voice cold. Matteo's eyes darted between the two of them, his confusion quickly replaced by suspicion. "Who is this?" Victor's smile widened. "Old friend," he said, though the way he looked at Eleanor suggested something far more complicated. "Just came by to see how she's doing." "I don't recall inviting you," Eleanor said, her tone sharp. "You need to leave." Victor leaned casually against the doorframe, his expression turning mocking. "Is that any way to talk to the man who's been keeping you afloat these last few months?" Matteo stiffened, his jaw tightening. "What the hell is he talking about?" Eleanor shot Victor a warning glare, but he ignored her, his gaze fixed on Matteo. "Oh, she didn't tell you? While you were off playing Billionaire, Eleanor here had to scrape by. I offered her a little help, and she accepted. Grateful, really." "That's enough," Eleanor snapped, her voice trembling with anger. "You have no right." "Did you owe him money?" Matteo cut in, his voice low and dangerous. "No," Eleanor said firmly. "It wasn't like that." Victor smirked. "Not exactly. Let's just say I provided support, the kind you weren't around to give." Matteo's fists clenched, his patience wearing thin. "You heard her. Leave." Victor straightened, his smirk fading slightly as he met Matteo's steely gaze. "Fine. But we'll talk again, Eleanor. You know where to find me." As he turned and walked away, Eleanor slammed the door shut, her breathing unsteady. Matteo turned to her, his anger still simmering but tempered by concern. "Who is he?" he asked quietly. "A mistake," she said, rubbing her temples. "After the divorce, I was desperate. Victor offered to help me get back on my feet, but I didn't realize there were strings attached. He's been trying to worm his way back into my life ever since." Matteo nodded slowly, his expression darkening. "He won't bother you again." "Matteo," Eleanor began, but he held up a hand. "I mean it, Eleanor. No one's going to threaten you or this baby. Not on my watch." In the days that followed, Matteo's protective instincts only deepened. He hired security to ensure, much to Eleanor's dismay, and began making arrangements to provide more permanent support for her and the baby. But his actions weren't without consequences. At work, rumors began swirling about his sudden involvement with his ex-wife. Shareholders grew restless, questioning his focus, while Cassandra, humiliated by his abrupt departure from their date, made a public spectacle of their fallout in the tabloids. Matteo weathered the storm with quiet determination, but the strain was evident. "Why are you doing all this?" Eleanor asked one evening as they worked together to organize the nursery. Her tone wasn't accusatory but curious, as if she couldn't fully grasp his motivations. Matteo paused, a baby blanket in his hands. "Because I love you," he said simply. "I never stopped." Eleanor froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She searched his face for any sign of insincerity but found none. His confession was raw, unguarded, and it terrified her. "Matteo," she began, but he shook his head. "I know it's too soon," he said, "and I know I have a lot to make up for. But I needed you to know. No matter what happens between us, I'll always be here for you and the baby." Eleanor's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope. The climax of their journey came on a stormy night, 2 weeks later. Eleanor woke in the middle of the night, doubled over in pain. Panic set in as she realized her water had broken, 2 weeks earlier than expected. She grabbed her phone and dialed Matteo without hesitation. "Eleanor," he answered groggily, his voice immediately alert when he heard her labored breathing. "What's wrong?" "It's happening," she said, her voice trembling. "The baby's coming." "I'm on my way," he said, already grabbing his keys. "Just breathe, Eleanor. I'll be there in 10 minutes. True to his word, Matteo arrived within minutes, helping her into the car and racing to the hospital. The hours that followed were a blur of doctors, nurses, and agonizing contractions. Matteo never left her side, holding her hand and whispering words of encouragement. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy baby boy, the room filled with a profound, overwhelming silence. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face as she held her son for the first time, her exhaustion eclipsed by a love she'd never known. Matteo stood beside her, his own eyes misty as he looked at the tiny life they had created together. "He's perfect," he whispered. Eleanor looked up at him, her defenses finally crumbling. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being here, for everything." Matteo leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I wouldn't be anywhere else." In the weeks that followed, they began to rebuild their lives together, one fragile step at a time. There were no grand declarations or sweeping promises, just quiet moments of trust and understanding, the foundations of a second chance. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching their son sleep, Eleanor turned to Matteo. "Do you think we can do this? Be a family?" Matteo met her gaze, his expression filled with quiet conviction. "I know we can." And for the first time in a long time, Eleanor believed him. Together they faced an uncertain future, but they faced it as a family, ready to fight for the life they both wanted. It wasn't the ending either of them had envisioned, but it was the beginning of something far greater. A new chapter, written together,